Hello, everyone. Welcome to Design Together, a podcast exploring how designers work together. I am your host, Abby Ryan Guido, a designer and educator working in Philadelphia, collaborating everywhere. Today we have with us Gavin Cooper, Senior Manager of UX Strategy at Vanguard. Gavin has traversed both worlds of design, being both an educator and a leader in the industry. Gavin, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Before we jump into everything that we're going to discuss today, Gavin, I thought we could start off and have you introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about your background and how you ended up in your position where you are today.
So my background's a bit traditional in the sense of my education is in graphic design. So I am one of those, I guess, more senior people, just by way of age in the design business, coming up on 20 years. And when I started out, graphic design, was and still is sort of a thriving industry. But at that time, it was largely rooted in print design, branding, and identity and those things. And it still is. But there was this kind of question in the industry back then around, graphic design as it relates to interactive design and digital and this sort of rise of that. So that's where my career started was, traditional graphic design curriculum here in Philadelphia, and then coming out into some design studios locally, doing print design, branding, et cetera. But then there was this looming, who is going to design the digital side of, and there's the engineering side of it, there's the business side of it. Now it's evolved to product and those kinds of things. So a lot of change back, way back then. So I kind of straddled both interactive design, as we called it back then, or web design, and then graphic design kind of early on. So I embraced it. So that kind of evolved over the first couple years of my career. And I was a kind of print web hybrid type of designer. And I learned how to code to a certain degree. I was always interested in, programming and the logic behind certain things, and especially the function behind making designs work. So that in some ways was a passion, and it just kind of dovetailed nicely into the demand of the market, is people were looking for designers who could do that. So, that wave, I think, lasted for a number of years. And then in doing so, I kind of came to a little bit of a fork in the road. At that point, I actually was working at Vanguard, which, and I'll talk a little bit how I came back. But my first experience with working at Vanguard was real exposure to the other sides of design, other sides of business. So what really did evolve into UX, but at that time was called we kind of called different things, but research and data to support design decisions, and how design could embed itself and give business better outcomes and give users better outcomes and, different audiences. And that kind of rigor really fascinated me. I was really exposed to those that didn't necessarily have a design background, but their work influenced design very heavily. So really that kind of multidisciplinary culture that was there, the multidisciplinary teams really fascinated me. So really great experience. I think that was one of those aha moments that we have in our career around, this is really where I'm most motivated. I love doing this kind of work, and I love contributing from a design perspective in doing so. So that lasted a few years at Vanguard. And then I did get to the point that I wanted to make sure I sharpened, kind of deepened my design sensibilities, because I was balancing both business, engineering, design. For the last number of years, I wanted to go deep in design. Also, I guess throughout that process, I was teaching adjunct courses in design, and really found, again, one of those aha moments of, I love teaching.
You caught the teaching bug.
Absolutely. And it was one of those circumstances that a friend of mine, Sam Fritsch, a local photographer, was kind of leaving his adjunct class, and it was an opening, and it was just one of those kind of luck of the draw kind of situations. And I took over, a basic Photoshop class, and really loved just teaching and curating content and writing syllabi and all those kinds of things. So I knew I loved that, and I loved what I was doing professionally. So how could I balance both worlds? So in then diving deep into, or kind of immerse myself into a design training, I also wanted to maintain teaching. So that kind of led me to graduate school, right? So I could get a MFA in design, go really deep and immerse myself in kind of design sensibilities, and also allow myself to kind of build credentials for, teaching So I did that for went to Tyler School of Art, huge plug, obviously very biased, right? And just had such a fantastic experience, as you could imagine, just the classroom dynamic. At that point, it was in person, which was, I think, really important for me to literally make those connections with my peers. The professors were just so fantastic. And still to this day, I going to reference back to that experience and what I learned from it. From that, I went into teaching. So I started at the University of Pennsylvania teaching design. And that was also a bit of a crossroads of where their curriculum was, where they wanted design as part of the practice, but it also had a touch to business students and to engineering students. And anybody could take design classes. And I loved that experience as somewhat of a continuation to what happened at Vanguard, to what I've had exposure to with previous.
Sure, kind of connects to everything you were doing.
Absolutely.
So it seems like a good fit at the time.
Yeah. So I taught there for a few years, and then I went to what it was Philadelphia University at the time, now Jefferson, to really kind of immerse myself deeper into graphic design and kind of full-time design majors, where at Penn it was almost, anybody could take the design courses type thing. So very different approaches to education. So loved that, that experience as well. And while I was teaching, I also had my practice, Cooper Graphic Design, with my wife, Michelle. That was running for a number of years, and still liked the balance of the education and having a foot into the practice. Interactive design, UX design, and strategy were really kind of the core kind of, I'll say, functions that I, taught and brought to the business.
It kind of seems like your whole history led you to get into this field. It kind of was created just for you, Gavin.
I don't know. I think in some ways I tripped, stumbled, and kind of fought my way through it in some ways. But I think you're right in that there's a certain amount of destiny as part of this, that I always wanted to go with things that just made me motivated, made me excited. And it just happened to also be things you could, do for a living and people were asking for. So that's, I think, luck in many ways. So from there, and I'll just kind of fast forward, that lasted for about 10 plus years. And then in the last, 6 years, I was talking to a former mentor of mine, Stephen Shackelford, who was my original boss at Vanguard, and contacted him and just kind of thinking about my next step and what do I want to do. And, he was talking about where Vanguard was at that point, is they were really looking to bring UX strategy on, go deeper into kind of UX practices, et cetera. So decided to make a big shift.
Okay. And then that was about 5 or 6 years ago, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've been there since?
And I've been there ever since.
Okay. And your current role, will you tell us a little about what you're doing now there?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's somewhat evolved. When I first, I'll say, came back to Vanguard, I was a UX strategist, kind of a sole, what we call a specialist focused in that area. And then the last number of years, it's evolved into design leadership. So leading teams, right? Leading multidisciplinary teams, leading design strategy practices as it relates to business outcomes. So not unlike the things that I was very passionate about and did in my studio and did in the classroom, just now in this case, it was at the corporate level, sort of through a big company.
And did you leave teaching altogether for now?
I did. It was a tough, crossroads as we find ourselves in making career decisions, but sadly I did, I'll say, shelve it, but not to say it's going to stay on the shelf. I would and will get back into it at some point for sure. But that said, I think I get my teaching fix in mentoring either young designers or strategists, or just working with different teams. So I wouldn't say teaching's totally not part of my life, but the formal teaching role, I would like to explore again at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I know for myself, when I went through and got my MBA, there's so many connections to learning, the kind of foundations of being a good leader.
Yeah.
Compared to being a leader in a classroom. Like, I felt like everything I was taking in and reading about, I could just translate and do the same type of work in my classrooms. So I understand totally that is always going to be part of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd love to talk a little bit about how collaboration works at Vanguard, how your teams are structured, and kind of who works on what types of projects, who are the stakeholders, and all of that good stuff.
It's been interesting because it's evolved over the last number of years, but one of the kind of critical staples throughout those years have been, multidisciplinary teams. So, someone with the UX design role, someone with the UX strategy role, they're similar in some ways, but they do have very specific needs. Working with the engineers, what we call developers, working with data analysts, and working with kind of business sponsors. So our teams really have that makeup, and they're together all the time. They focus on, a certain part of the business, and they just become experts, and all of them become experts. And that's a really important part of being successful.
So are those teams together always on this particular product, and that's just what they're on? That's their job. They're hired to be on this team?
That's right.
Okay.
And there are some rotational things about that, like people, change jobs and those kinds of things. People get promoted, but yes, the team is really focused on a particular product.
I've talked to different people at different places about team structure and teams being put together for certain projects and then being on different teams for other projects. Do you want to talk a little bit about the benefits of the structure of having these team members that you're continually working with? And maybe it's more than only benefits. Maybe it's also like, where do you see issues and how do you address those as well?
Yeah. And I think I'll speak from a maybe design, perspective first, and then maybe talk about just, general team benefits. I think someone in UX or someone from design is you really have such a strong sense of why you're there or why design is important to the business outcomes. So you really broaden your perspective. You learn so much about purpose, about why, interactive design needs to be simple, be easy to use, like what investment, in our case, outcomes are we making happen for people? How are we bettering their lives? So you really get to immerse yourself into the business practices, why the business is there, why it's important for us to be successful, et cetera. I'll say versus making it nice looking, making it easy to use. Those are important things, but sometimes you miss the why behind it all. And I think when the teams are together all of the time, immerse themselves into a product, they know every corner of it. They know even the back-end systems that support it. They know, how it connects to maybe the call center or the app or all these other connection points. And that is, amazing knowledge to really drive change. That it does take time, to build that knowledge, so that there's a bit of a cost associated with it. But I think the benefits come out tenfold.
And then when someone new joins a team, how do they you're saying there's a long process. How long does that usually take, and how do they kind of get used to being part of that particular collaboration?
There's a couple of ways in which we try to catalyst that. I mean, one is this kind of very simple buddy system of sorts where you shadow, the experts on the team, and you're around them all day, every day. So while there is a learning curve, it's not really that long when you're 100% dedicated to that team. You're exposed to or have access to the data side of it, the business side of it, the subject matter experts. I mean, they're all right kind of there and accessible.
Are the teams physically together when you are on the campus? Are they sitting in the same area?
They are. I mean, literally I'll say desks or tables are organized, by product in that way. So designers don't necessarily all sit together, or all disciplines sit together. It's really all product teams sit together. And even just that orientation creates a really great culture for collaboration.
Are there opportunities? Because, what I'm hearing is, there might be a few UX designers on this one team, but then there's UX designers on other teams and strategists. And do those folks ever get a chance to get together and talk about what they're working on individually on their own teams?
Yeah, I think this is where design leadership comes in. This is where mentorship really plays a part. That we have various groups, kind of in addition to your product team, we have various groups available where we bring all the UX strategists together. We bring all the UX designers together. And we have forums led by leaders like myself and my peers, where we talk about broader topics. We talk about even career pathing and those kinds of things outside of the product team. And that's a relatively steady cadence of that. I would say that happens weekly or biweekly or even monthly. And we know it's super important to have what we call peer coaching opportunities, because there's a vast, variety of years of experience and levels and those kinds of things. So we bring people together in those moments to really almost build the career or build the mindset or bring together shared mindset. And that's where the culture. You almost see the culture, in action. It's great to see.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important, just to have those other folks who kind of are a little bit on the outside because they're not on your team, but that you can go to and you can, possibly get some advice or get some help. And that idea of this peer, and what was the word you used?
Peer coaching.
Peer coaching. I love that. Yeah, I think that's really great. Something that you and I had kind of talked a little about before today that I wanted to dive in deeper with you was that the theme that really came out of the first season of the show was communication and how important it is to be a good communicator in order to be a good collaborator. What I go back and listen and I feel is missing is thinking about, well, what does that actually mean?
Mm-hmm.
You can say be a good communicator, and someone might interpret that as, okay, I need to make sure I talk to Gavin 10 times today and send him 20 emails, which we know we don't want that, right? And so I think it's important that we talk a little about like what actually does good communication look like.
Yeah, it's obviously a big question and everyone's trying to solve it in different ways. And what we found, and I think this is at Vanguard, but even prior to that, that it's interesting where when different backgrounds come together, different disciplines come together, everyone has their almost own way of speaking and describing things and very different ways of describing the same thing. All right. And in design, I feel like we're, guilty of the buzzwords that we all know of, but maybe our outside partners don't know too much. We have acronyms, we have all these different things, and that's great, and that's in some ways. But at the same time, when it comes to communicating with, say, a business partner or an engineer or somebody else, there has to be what I call kind of a normalization of language. You have to speak in such a way that's relatable and
Sure.
that they can react to and feel like the conversation is going both ways. So I think that's one of the first things that I coach or teach teams is figure out a way in which that there's a business outcome that you can easily describe. People are trying to, buy this service or buy a product, understand why they need it. Like if you put it in those terms, everybody can generally understand it. And there's ways in which an engineer can help that. There's ways in which designers can help that. But you have to almost take the industry speak out of your day-to-day language.
Yeah, it kind of seems like you're talking about like a shared goal. And if you all have that same shared goal, you speak the language that will help lead you to that goal.
Absolutely. You said it better. That's for sure. and I say the word goal probably, 20 times a day where, at the end of the day, there is an end state goal. And with that also comes prioritization. You have to prioritize and be selective on the things you are going to communicate about. Right? We can't have 20 problems all going at the same time. What's the one? What's the two? What are the top three things we're all focused on, et cetera? And being able to almost instantly prioritize what's the most important thing. I think that's a big part of communication as well. You can't talk about everything, but what's the most important thing that you need to discuss and have a solution towards?
So I imagine for different folks, it's harder than others to develop this language and to be able to speak in a way that everyone else can know what you're talking about. Do you have any advice to someone who's coming in? I think sometimes, we get so used to talking to other designers about our work. And we feel like we've built this knowledge of how to talk about our work to designers. And not that someone wants to show it off, but they want to show they have that knowledge. So how do you help someone work through that and get to the point where they can talk about their work in a little bit of a different way?
Yeah, it's a good, again, great question. I think in some cases, I think context will probably matter here, where if you're talking with, say, a business leader, you would speak maybe differently. But I would say versus say a peer or teammate or something like that. But in all cases, you want to understand either why a goal is important or establish the goal if you don't have one. And if you put it in language that is, I think from the end user's perspective, if you really had to oversimplify, I'll say UX practice, we're generally defining problems or we're solving problems. So what are those problems? And break it down into basic terms as much as possible. So I tell folks, ask why a lot. So why is this important? Why is this important? If we understand that we're trying to get people to do something. So we're trying to influence behavior. Well, why is that important? What's the end, say either business goal or personal goal that we're trying to achieve for them? And if you put your questions within the end user, generally that's an easy way to have a conversation around why it's important. And I think that makes it easier to understand versus the big acronyms or sort of the buzzwords and all of that, asking why a lot will probably start to take that stuff away.
That's funny. I don't remember who I had this conversation with before, but I was talking about, I can recall when I was beginning and having this feeling that non-designers didn't understand my work. And so it wasn't even worth my time to talk about my work to them. And I think the industry has changed, and that kind of elitist, gatekeeping behavior of we know best is going away.
Yeah.
And I think with that, there's more of an opportunity and more of an encouragement really to those starting out to know they're solving a problem that's not for themselves and not just for their own peers. And so I love this idea of asking the questions and understanding the whys of what you're being asked to do. And I think just even having those conversations with your teammates and with those around you help you kind of evolve that language so that you can present then to the other stakeholders outside of your team.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think from that communication, and you hit on it, that it really builds trust. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, you want to be a good communicator so that your teammates or stakeholders or whomever, clients, they trust you. They enough about the end state rationale, why we're doing something, why it's important, and you bring expertise where they may not need to know, principles of typography or color theory, although they're going to rely on you to work that out. But that all of that leads to, better business or a better sort of outcome that we're all driving towards. So I think credibility is a big part of that communication as well.
Totally. So on communication and what makes a good communicator. So we've talked about how to communicate to other stakeholders, to, let's say, clients, even if they're internal. What about communication within your team? Can we talk a little bit about tips and what you should be looking for and learning to be a good collaborator communicating within your own team?
Yeah, absolutely. So my particular team is a team of managers, so a team of leaders in many cases, and then they have teams that they oversee. So it's super important that communication kind of permeates outward, but also that not everybody needs to know everything at the same time. So the first thing that, I think I talked a little bit about prioritization. So I'll say it maybe a slightly different way. Be very selective about the most important things to communicate. If I sent out, a 500-word email every day, that would be over communicated. It would start to kind of drown out in ways. So one of the first things we do is we establish what I call meeting cadences. Okay, so how often are we as, a team of leaders going to meet? And then how often are we as a collective team, the bigger team, going to meet? And there are, established ceremonies out there. There are 15-minute stand-ups, right, every day. So, okay, we're going to talk about the goals of the day or the goals of the week. Okay, and that's the purpose of that particular meeting. We'll have a staff meeting. And in staff meeting, we're going to talk about quarterly topics or performance-related things or career path things. So we're very diligent about the frequency and purpose of each of our meetings. We really try not to make them have, a general get together or let's just talk about anything. Like we're actually really selective.
So they're very deliberate. Yeah. They have a purpose, just as you're talking about with the projects. They're why.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can answer the why.
Yeah, and there's proven methods of we also have a kind of a principle to steal from each other, right? Some team figured out a really nice way to communicate effectively, and everyone's on the same page, and there's never ambiguity, and they just never have a challenge with that. Okay, so what are they doing, and can we do that type of thing? So if something's not working, whether it be a meeting or we don't have an agenda or we sort of have a steady stream of not having agendas, then we're going to change this. So the ability to just kind of hold yourself accountable to how communication is happening and how could we be better. So a constant, almost like, what we call retro of how we're doing and by way of communication.
I talk about this and I think about my own students who go out into the world and are thrown into these environments, and they come to me and ask me questions like, should I ask this? And I always say questions are great. Like, you should be asking everything, and don't ask me. You're not working for me. Go ahead and ask who you're working with. And I think that there's a fear a lot for someone starting out new, that they have to show they already have this knowledge, that they were hired for what they knew. And so they can't be,
Yeah.
showing everyone that they're, they don't know what's happening. And I think that's unfortunate, because for me, a good leader, that should be one of the first things you say, ask those
Mhm.
questions. Like,
Absolutely.
we know you're here to learn. You're here because you're developing, and we want to help you, and we won't be able to if we don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I can't underline that enough. It's so important to, be able to, one, have the space to. So that's a little bit on the leader to create an environment where
hmm
questions are encouraged and, fostered, and et cetera. And the art of asking really good questions, I think, is one of the number one skills that I would suggest is, just be very selective in some ways, but also just open and always thinking about what you don't know, and make sure your teammates, your manager, whomever, have a steady set of questions that you need to know or want to know that they're answering. And with that also comes confidence, because to your point, I don't want to ask this question and feel like I don't know something I should. I think that happens early, middle, and late in everyone's career. So there are some,
oh yeah.
yeah, we're all exposed to, some people call it imposter syndrome, or just creative confidence, or all these things that,
Yeah, you go back to those acronyms. That's what I think about. How many meetings have you been in where someone says something and everyone, agrees, and you're like, I don't know what that acronym means at all,
right,
but everyone else does, so I can't ask. I mean, I've had that happen recently to me.
right, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I generally do one of two things. If I had any tips on that, I generally do one of two things. If it's in a big forum where only a handful of
Google.
questions, right? I mean, somewhat like Google it or write it down and ask a peer, like, oh, what did that mean? I didn't know. Don't let it go, or don't hope that it just, oh, the dots will connect later, type of thing. Like, be very purposeful in filling some of those gaps as you recognize them. But also, there's nothing wrong with, in fact, it's encouraged to come in with that a certain amount of vulnerability, and almost disclaim that you're going to come out of maybe left field, or I may ask this question. This may be a higher level, or we may need to talk about this off to the side, but I need to understand why this is important, and maybe how it connects to other things, and just disclaim that you need help in connecting some dots. I think people are generally more receptive to helping than not. So, but it takes courage, and I just encourage all of my team and people I've talked to, and even myself, just to make sure you ask the question, even if you feel like you may be judged in a certain way, because generally I don't think you will, if you're asking really good questions.
Well, and I think how you started everything, that it really relies on a leader that creates the environment where that's encouraged. And I know for me, one way I do that is that I ask questions myself. So, it can happen easier now for me with teaching, 18, 19-year-olds, because they bring something in that is a pop culture reference that I have no idea what it is, but I show that early. I ask questions myself early, and I say, I don't know everything, and I don't, I'm not going to pretend like I do.
Yeah.
So when I don't, I will ask. And so I think modeling that behavior is so important for leaders, to create that safe environment to be able to. And I also loved the idea of giving whoever you're talking to that out, that maybe this isn't the time to have the discussion,
Mm-hmm. Right.
but that may be later. And I think that those little clues you're giving and those little tips are so important to remember for so many scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Not kind of changing the course of the conversation because you're confused, but saying, hey, can we go back to this later? Like, I'm just not sure I got what that was.
Absolutely.
So thanks for sharing that, for sure. And talking about being a leader, I know you're in the role to facilitate these collaborations, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you facilitate collaboration. And this could be even down to the nitty gritty of, I like to use this type of exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be really great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So it certainly doesn't come to a surprise to you, or to any of us, that design thinking as a kind of overall embodiment of methodologies has surfaced. And I think this is the reason why, because in many respects, approaches around design thinking exercises and methods are really about collaboration. It allows more of a formal conversation, but if I had to oversimplify design thinking, I think in many cases it's a conversation amongst a group, generally from different backgrounds and different disciplines, to come together and kind of come with some type of output or some type of conversation. So the first thing, well, I'll say the general framework that I use is open, explore, close. And that's something I've heard and learned from kind of facilitation experts, where every conversation has an open of some sort. We're here to talk about X. And then there's an exploration part of it, which could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, it could even be a day or whichever, but there's going to be ways in which we explore this conversation. Okay. And then we're going to close on either the next steps as a result of it, or actions we're going to ask other people to do, but it's going to have that, next thing. Generally, we're not going to solve it all here. We're going to solve it in, future discussions. So everyone having that mindset is helpful. Okay. Every discussion we have is going to have an open, explore, close. What are we here to talk about? We're either going to brainstorm, we're going to just collect topics, we're going to do something of some sort. And then let's explore that. And then we're going to talk about next steps. And that's where design thinking facilitation, I think, really shines. And there's a whole host of, I think, go-to things for me generally.
If you have a group, different kind of approaches, do you plan ahead?
Yeah.
Like, do you know, a new thing is coming, I'm going to grab this approach. I think this would be good for this. Is it part of that open conversation of how are we going to explore this? How does it actually work?
Yeah, that's it. It definitely is. As we open the conversation, we're going to talk about the objectives of the meeting, which could be anywhere from we're going to discuss this, or we're going to understand this more, or there's generally a handful of goals of every collaboration session. And oftentimes it's all of our inputs are going to come together in some format, right? Stickies on the wall type of thing. And it doesn't have to be that engineered or complex per se, but you do want to kind of time box it in to a certain degree and tee it up in that open. Okay, so we're going to talk about this, and this is the format in which we're going to do it, which could be everyone has stickies and you're going to write out some things and you're going to post on this wall. Also, a common thing is thought starters, right? I'm going to tee this problem up. We want to understand, what students are thinking about a particular class or something like that, to put it in the education realm. And okay, so here's what I've heard. I've heard that, the virtual environment is challenging. I've heard this. I want you guys to react to these topics of sorts and get your opinions on it. Do you think it's true? Do you think it's not true, et cetera? So the open is really important, just to set the tone of the conversation. The facilitator doesn't have to know the answers or be the experts. And I think that's an important part, because they need a certain amount of confidence that a conversation can happen that you are just really orchestrating. You're not the expert in it, but teeing it up is really important, that you want to gather inputs on something. Here's what I've heard. Here's what others have said. What are your reaction to that? And we're not going to go point by point. We're literally just going to have everybody put it out at the same time. So it's almost like agnostic of level or who reports to who or whichever. I just want to get your thoughts out there. And then we're going to start to organize themes into certain areas. And then we're going to talk about, like whether we're going to vote, or we're going to just pick, or maybe just one person picks, or we're going to bring them to our stakeholders and have them pick. And that's the kind of close part of it.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. So are these meetings typically more the design team and engineers and not the, internal clients within the company? Or
I would say it's the teams themselves have these kind of conversations. Okay. And sometimes it's 5 people, sometimes it could be 50, but even if it's 50, it's probably broken into smaller groups in some way.
Sure.
Yeah.
And do you usually facilitate these for the teams you work with, or do you bring someone from the outside in so that you're part of the conversation?
It's a good question. I would say both. I facilitate a fair amount of conversations, and I'm often, certainly not the expert of the particular topic, but I need a lot of people to kind of weigh in on it, and then I'll think about it afterwards. So I facilitate a lot of conversations in the way that I just kind of described. And then if there's a challenging conversation or something that needs a lot of candor and we just need to be very real, there are expert facilitators who handle those kinds of conversations. So then I'll reach out for those, for kind of what I would call like specialized type of facilitation for sure.
I think that it's always great as a leader to put yourself in the seat of one of the team members too sometimes, and to learn from other facilitators, because everyone runs things slightly differently. And I know for myself, every time I get to work through a design thinking workshop, I get new ideas of what I want to do next time that I have the opportunity to facilitate a conversation.
Absolutely. And I am honestly continuously just always learning different facilitation nuances, like nudging, and how do you draw people in? How do you maybe make sure everybody has a voice in the conversation?
You're actually, it's funny you just said that. I was going to ask, like, what do you do when there's kind of the, dead silence and the fear of contributing to the conversation? How do you nudge someone to get the voices heard?
Yeah, it's a good question. And one mistake I think I probably even still make is try to get too much out of a conversation, where I'll open with a kind of a big topic, maybe some thought starting questions, but it's too much. It's like really hard for the team to just like anchor right into this particular topic. So I'll usually do one of two things. I'll narrow the scope in the moment. All right, we're going to talk about one thing. And I know there's 10 topics here or thought starting questions.
Pretend like they're not here. Let's just look at this one.
This one, right? Yeah. So kind of pivot on the spot in some cases. Or if I think it's going to happen, I'll send either like materials ahead of time or even do like a mini session trial run with somebody beforehand, and just to see is someone kind of engaging with this, and I'll ask peers, et cetera. So a fair amount of time can go into the facilitation of it all, but I do believe it's worth it. The time and the cost to bring everybody together to not get enough out of it is worse than good prep. So good prep is, I think, one of the biggest keys to success of a good conversation.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning about communication and about being able to talk to the right audience and the right kind of vocabulary, right language. I hear you talking about kind of testing it out. It's the same type of thing. Like, how do I frame this problem and this conversation so that everyone in the room knows what we're talking about and understands what I'm saying? Because I'd imagine oftentimes yourself as a facilitator, you probably have more knowledge about whatever this problem is. Like, you've prepared. And so now how do I give that information in a quick, way to this new group of people who are going to be talking about it?
Absolutely.
So something else that I've been wanting to talk to someone about, and I hope that it's you, is how do you evaluate someone's, ability to collaborate? Is that part of their, performance reviews? How does that work at Vanguard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. And it can be challenging because in many ways, there are soft skills, right? In ways it's like, well, how are you a good communicator? It's not a binary yes/no thing, right? It's usually a spectrum of where you've had some successes in some areas or to some audiences, but less to others. So we do embed it into a set of skills. And I think we look at performance a lot of ways, but there's a couple skills that I think communication are one of the key parts. And one is the ability to kind of synthesize your work. So if you're presenting a design, you're not going to talk about every single sketch, every single idea, every single XYZ. So you're going to walk someone through, your process, and sometimes in a minute, in 30 seconds, just to kind of anchor everybody.
What I worked on for 6 months?
Right. And
1 minute?
I know. And one tendency, and I'm guilty of this too, is to, immerse everyone in the process, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you have a, recommendation. This is ultimately what we came up with, or I think is the right thing, or whichever. And you want to get to that. So we describe this as like the ability to synthesize your work. So are you able to, give the 30-second pitch, give the 5-minute version, give maybe the 20-minute version as it is necessary. And we use a lot of feedback from your teammates. And we encourage folks to solicit feedback. How am I doing? How could this have been better? And as managers, we don't wait to give feedback. So almost at the end of every meeting or presentation, there'll be some level of, this, I thought that was really clear and really crisp. And this is what resonated with the people in the room. I noticed them really engaging. Or this is why you may have heard crickets because it got too deep into the process and it honestly doesn't matter to them as much as the recommendation, get to it faster.
Do you have those conversations individually with someone, or do you talk about it as a full team?
Usually individual, I think, in terms of giving that feedback. And that said, if as a group we'll talk about tips and tricks and examples of where it goes well, like the open, explore, close kind of framework. And there's others. Always kind of bring this to your meetings, do it your own way, have your own voice, but make sure you connect with the audience. If you're talking to a senior stakeholder, you really have to get down to and the recommendation. If you're talking to the team about challenges you're having, bring those up as well.
Go into the details.
Go into the details. So knowing your audience and having those simple tips is something we talk about as a group.
Okay. So part of it is communication in your performance review. Are there other parts of the review that talk about how you collaborate in addition to communication?
A lot of it comes down to output and the ability for the entire team to articulate the goal, right? So one thing that I'll try is I'll talk to each team member individually about what do you think the team is working on now, what are the goals, et cetera. And that kind of gives me a sense of how the communication is going. We emphasize that we all have to anchor on the top 2-3 things that we're working on. Yes, there's probably 100 underneath that, but above all else, these 3 things are the priority. And talking to them individually and having them describe it usually gives us a sense of how the communication might be going. And then ask the business side of things, or ask the engineers, what do they think we're working on? And when's the last time we gave the team an update on the UX side of things of what we're working on? How often do we do that? So those kinds of probing questions can usually tell me how communication might be going and how it could be better, or how it's going really well.
I'm curious about yourself throughout your career. Like, what have you done to develop the skills you have now to facilitate these conversations and to lead by example?
Making a lot of mistakes, I would say, is the core of it, and not being afraid to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Be vulnerable. And there's time, and it's still a struggle for sure. Like, nobody likes being vulnerable. Put yourself in situations that, like, I was never a very good public speaker, right? And I knew that early on. And it wasn't like I didn't, I'm probably an introverted person at the end of the day. I'm not someone who, gets energy from giving public speeches, et cetera. And I knew I had to get better at it. So I just had to sit down and focus on classes, training, tips, techniques, watch people, observe them, ask them how do they do it? Like, how do you just prepare for that and put it into a pretty step-by-step process? Like, that's what works for me. If I can know the process and how someone prepares, that allows me to, either take some of that and apply it in my own way. So those kind of either facilitation or public speaking, those things I was not naturally sort of good at early on, just really focusing on and making sure that above all else, I'm just going to get at least moderately good. I've gone through a ton of training and I'm moderately good at something. It's like, okay, well, it's progress.
In some ways, you have to do the research to figure out how you can improve and where you can kind of challenge yourself and make those mistakes, give yourself the opportunity to make the mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is important, is to put yourself in the positions where you can kind of challenge yourself and continue to learn and grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And commit to it. Just commit to, I'm going to just be better at this. So I'm going to be uncomfortable for a lot of it. And that's an okay thing. So I think, especially as you get older, you realize that at the end of the day, it's okay. We get a lot of anxiety about maybe not doing well or not looking as if we have everything together, but that's part of growth. There's the only way you're going to grow is if you focus on it. So I just told myself that, and still tell myself that at the end of the day. But that's important, that I just keep learning and make progress and not get so hung up on perfection, because there's always going to be, it could have been better here, there, and otherwise in there, but that you always stay focused on the progress that you're making. That's more important than the perfection.
Progress and process. Yeah. I think that it's good to remember there's someone else out there that can do what you're doing better. I love that I'm always able to keep getting better at this and to keep honing my craft and improving, whether it be in communication or leading or teaching or even designing.
Yep.
You don't want to be at the very top, because then where's there to go?
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll change as well. As I think as you even get into design leadership, you're not doing tactical design every day and you used to. So in some ways you're building leadership skills, but maybe letting certain things deteriorate. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. You have a different purpose, different role now. So that helps me stay focused that my purpose is this now. It's not to know everything or to know how to solve every problem. That's impossible. And we need to do it together and just kind of bring that mindset to the team.
And I think that's really hard for designers because many of us were trained to kind of be the jack of all trades and to be able to do everything. And that as you move on in your career to know like you're letting go of something, but it's not that you're leaving that empty space in your brain. You're replacing, you're building other knowledge.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And you're helping others grow. Now, one of my favorite things is watching others, grow and evolve and have them get better at things and have them acknowledge the things that, or what I call the kind of aha moments of, okay, now I'm starting to get progress on this. I'm getting excited. I mean, that is the most enjoyable thing of my job, is to see other people on my team, have those moments.
We have to get you back in the classroom, Gavin.
I can't wait. I miss it terribly.
Well, we're going to keep trying. All right. Well, thank you so much, Gavin, for being here. It was really great to talk to you. And anyone out there listening wants to hear more about Gavin, you can check out his website, gavincooper.com.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for this, Abby. It's awesome.
Thanks so much. Thank you all so much for listening. If you are enjoying our show, please post us a review on whatever podcast streaming platform you use. To learn more about us, check out our website at designtogetherpod.com.